Good morning, everyone. So from an early age, from a very early age, as human beings, we determine that, or I should say, we make a decision that we wish to seek an undisturbed state of mind, or an undisturbed state is probably a better way of putting it. And for a very young child, for a baby, that is because their survival depends on it. So as an infant, for instance, we can't survive without being fed. And then there's the maybe perhaps only slightly less tangible aspects of touch and affection and attention. And then we learn that if we don't get that if we complain loudly often, that all of a sudden that assistance comes to us rapidly in many instances, and all of a sudden we're not so disturbed because we're not hungry anymore, or we're being touched, being loved, whatever. So ultimately, of course, there's not only is there nothing wrong with this, but it's an essential part of survival at an early age. And with many things like this, many aspects of our early childhood development, when we become adults, the same methodology that we used as an infant or as a young child don't serve us that well, or certainly don't serve others very well, and often they don't serve us very well either. So early on, we make this decision. The decision we make is that we are to seek the undisturbed state. And the reason that we are constantly seeking this state is we believe that our inner state is dependent upon sensations and circumstances outside of our control. And this is this decision that sensations and circumstances are outside of our control, and that we're seeking an undisturbed state of mind and body. This is a very I'll say that it's a prescription for suffering, because life, as some of you have lived a little while, some of you have lived longer than me in this lifetime, some a little less, but probably everyone is determined at this point that life is not just about non-disturbance. So as Zen practitioners, as meditators, the problem, and this is a big problem, I'll say, and the reason I say it's a big problem is not just because of my own viewpoint, but it's written about extensively in the ancient literature, is that we bring that same mindset to our meditation. And so what we're essentially seeking initially from meditation is normally an undisturbed state. Why? Because number one, we've been told that that's what happens when we meditate. And number two, we've probably experienced, at least at times, an undisturbed state when we're meditating. And it's a very powerful elixir, the undisturbed state, the state of quietude, of non-disturbance, of our suffering, a feeling that our suffering is being released in whether it's in our meditation or afterwards. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. If it is something that is happening, it's the reality for us in that moment. There's nothing wrong with that. The issue is the seeking of the undisturbed state. So again, most of us correct me if I'm wrong during the comment section. But most of us, when we begin meditating, it's because things aren't working well. We're feeling a lot of disturbance. We're suffering a lot, and maybe we read some Zen or Buddhism. And what did the Buddha teach that Buddhism is about? Well, he didn't call it Buddhism, number one, but people later did. But what the Buddha taught, what he was teaching, his teaching was about, I should say, was freeing beings from suffering, freeing sentient beings from suffering. It's very difficult to do that, to help others free themselves from suffering, if we're in a state of continual suffering, by the way. So this decision that that outside circumstances govern our inner state of being, we're not satisfied unless we've created the environment that's exactly what then results in non-disturbance for us, or seeming non-disturbance. And the chasing of the non-disturbance through our environmental factors, or other people even, or relationships, or substances, or anything else. It doesn't matter what it is. As long as we're relying on outside circumstances, outside sensations, outside objects, outside people, outside meaning outside of myself, of this particular skin bag, as it's called sometimes in ancient Buddhism. Not the most kind term, but it's true to a certain extent. As long as we're seeking that non-disturbance from something outside, we're eventually going to be disappointed. We will be disappointed. It's not a matter of if we're going to be disappointed, it's a matter of will be. And I'm sure, as I say, all of you have experienced that. So bringing that mindset to Zen, for instance, maybe in the beginning, it's not such a bad thing, because people do seek that non-disturbance in an inner way, instead of looking at non-disturbance through drinking a lot or drugs or something like that, or any particular addiction we have. And we're all addicted to something or another, to some degree or another. That we bring that same attitude into our meditation is probably not so bad at the very beginning, but quickly we find out that the more that we chase that experience of non-disturbance in an inner sense, the less it seems to be available to us. So it's as if, I'm saying as if somewhat rhetorically, but it's as if when we chase it, it goes away further. There is quite a bit of teaching about this. I'm going to read one particular little nice poem on this by Master Hongji. Here's what he says about that. And I love the poetic way he states it. He says, "A beam of wondrous light spans past and present, shining through being and non-being, transcending all discrimination. Grasp at it directly and you miss it completely." Grasp at it directly and you miss it completely. But we're so conditioned to grasp at it directly. I mean, when we start out and we're suffering, or even if we're not starting out, maybe we've been doing this a while, but we're still suffering, at least at times, or maybe we aren't suffering that much, then all of a sudden something in our life comes along and a giant button gets pushed, the big red button, all of a sudden, all of our composure, all of our equanimity that we thought we had goes out the window, and all of a sudden we're suffering again, maybe feeling like even worse than before, because not only are we suffering, but we're thinking, oh, I've been doing this for so long. How come I'm still suffering? Why am I still suffering if I've been doing this so long? Have you ever said that to yourself? I know I have. So there's that part of us that's still chasing that undisturbed state. And so when we don't experience the undisturbed state, then we start feeling that something's wrong. And often what'll happen, I feel, I know it happened to me, maybe it still happens to some degree, I'm not sure, but much less than it used to. We do a little bypassing trick, that term spiritual bypassing, and that we get so into this wonderful sensation and feeling of release, of non-disturbance, uh, that we start ignoring everything else in our psyche or everything else in our life that's running counter to that. Sometimes it's a big glaring red light flashing, and yet we're not seeing it because we're spending our time in this undifferentiated state all the time of where suffering is gone for at least a time period. So the very thing that starts us out in the practice in most instances is then that which gets in the way later. This is true of a lot of things, probably. When we start out, we have a certain motivation because our mind is perhaps in chaos and we're trying to get a handle on it. And we're taught that you can through this practice, and you can in a certain sense. But the interesting thing is that you don't get a handle on it by attempting to control it, because then what part of us is attempting to control? It's the same part that's attempting to control things all the time, which is often what gets us into trouble in the first place. That part that's always wanting to be in control. And the problem with always wanting to be in control isn't that we can't sometimes be in control, at least of some things, but that part doesn't rest with that. It wants to be in control of everything all the time, essentially. So it's kind of, we have to admit to ourselves a few things. We have to admit to ourselves that the control part of ourself wants to be in control all the time. When I say we have to, I mean, well, you don't really have to, but it's really valuable if we can. We can see that we want to control all the time, and that we've made this decision that the reason we want to be in control all the time is because our inner state is dependent upon outside things. And so if our inner state's dependent upon outside things, then there's this constant need to control the outside things that are running contrary to our non-disturbance. And if we apply the same logic, if you want to call it logic, I think it is kind of logical in a sense. We apply the same logic to our meditation and our inner state that we experience, which is essentially our mind state. When we say mind state in Zen, we don't mean just the intellectual mind, we mean the body mind. So our mind state, we apply that to our mind state, then we're constantly cycling through suffering, release from it, suffering, release from it, suffering, release from it, and chasing the release from it. All because we have this idea that we should be non-disturbed, that there should be this non-disturbed state, and that it comes from outside of ourselves, or even inside of ourselves for that matter. It doesn't really matter at a certain point. As long as we're chasing it, then, like Hongji said, the more we chase it, the further it goes away from us. There's a few Zen koans and poems that speak to this issue. The ordinary mind is the way. And then, the monk asks him, well, if the ordinary mind is the way, then how, essentially, how do I approach it? And the master says, well, you approach it by not approaching it. The more you try to approach it, the further away it goes. So, again, this is not easy to do. it's something that does take practice for most people, a lot of practice. And it crops up in different ways at different times throughout our uh, throughout our meditation career, you might say. And because it kind of runs contrary to our most ancient conditioning, our conditioning as an infant, as a young child, and it kind of runs contrary, well, does run contrary to our basic deep biological conditioning, which is to move away from something that's painful or uncomfortable. Even insects run away from us when we try and bite us anyway, when they're threatened. Certainly mammals all do, but even more basic life forms, there's this self-preservation instinct. It's natural. And so the problem with that is when we're dealing with inner psychological issues, which we are, or psycho-spiritual issues, as I like to call them, because I'm not sure what the difference is or where the one ends and the other begins. When we're dealing with those things, the existential crisis that an actual fight or flight syndrome was biologically designed into our bodies and minds to deal with isn't really there. A psychological issue is not the same as a saber-toothed tiger chasing us. It may feel like that. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it isn't. It isn't actually a life or death. If you let the saber-toothed tiger get you, you're dead. But if it's a conflict you're having with a worker or a family member or a spouse or whatever, it's not going to kill you. It may feel like that, but that's the delusion that we've boxed ourselves into. So we're running against this childhood conditioning and this deep biological conditioning that we're talking about, millions and millions of years of that. And it's why this particular teaching of turning the mind to face things rather than running from them or fighting them. In other words, resisting or fighting. I mean, resisting or avoiding, fighting or avoiding. There is what's called the middle way, which doesn't involve fighting and doesn't involve avoiding, which is experiencing and moving through deeply experiencing and clearly seeing through our experience what the reality is there. And so the suffering is alleviated when we see how we, not outside circumstances, but we are resisting or creating suffering in some form or another. And this is key and essential to Zen. And it is key to truly experiencing freedom from suffering in a certain sense, but not maybe the sense that the ego, the controlling part of the ego, was seeking initially, which is to control things and freedom that way. But rather the freedom is the freedom to feel, and the freedom to experience. Freedom to feel sounds like, what do you even mean by freedom to feel? Well, I feel stuff every day, but do we really allow ourselves to deeply go into it when that big red button is pushed? The big issues in our life, the pandemic, life, death, love, all that kind of stuff, attachment, big issues, not, what color my new car is going to be or something like that. That's not an existential threat one way or the other. So the big issues require kind of a big response. And sometimes we think we've got all that taken care of after 3 or 5 or 10 or 40 or 50 years of practice, and then something comes along and a big red button that we didn't even see that big red button, but the right circumstance arises, or the right person or the right situation, and that button gets pushed, and oh my God. Has all this been for nothing? All this practice I've done, all this time, all this meditation? Well, that's a good question. That's what we have to allow ourselves to go into. No matter how many years or how many days or how many hours we've been doing this, I know there's some pretty new people maybe in this group. It doesn't matter the amount of time. It's a matter of, are we willing to allow ourselves to doubt and go deeply into the doubt? Deeply into the doubt means allowing ourselves to really feel it. When someone tells me they don't have any doubt, I don't care how many years they've been doing anything, I'm always suspicious of that. When someone presents themselves as a person without any doubt, and maybe there are some gurus somewhere, or I don't know, some kind of masters that don't have any doubt. But I would have to spend a few months with them in some trying circumstances and see, do they really not have any doubt? Not any? What is there to work with then? Disturbance gives us a place to work and a way to become more free. Disturbance and doubt is the avenue that we travel in order to move deeper. Does that mean I'm promoting disturbance? No, I'm not promoting disturbance. It's not like I'm out there particularly looking for it, but guess what? It arrives sooner or later in the form of a financial crisis, a health crisis, an existential crisis of some sort, some kind of dark night of the soul, perhaps, even though we don't really talk about souls in Zen, but you know what I mean. So let's open it up in case anyone has any comments or questions. I want to make a little comment myself about what I've seen lately as a falling off of discussion on the Sunday group. And I just want to say that part of the value of a group like this is dialogue. And just listening to a talk and not offering ever anything is you're only receiving part of the benefit. In other words, a large part of the benefit is through dialogue and through inquiry, and also sometimes through vulnerability, by the way, through being willing to just say what's going on with you. But I think it's also important to realize that everyone has these questions. Everyone has vulnerabilities, including people who've been doing the practice a lot longer than you have. So just wanted to put that out there. So we'll open it up.
Thank you, Roshi. Hi. Wonderful. I wanted to uh, talk about how doubt seems to be the way into this issue, in the sense of I can so often react to my own disturbance like that's not the right kind of disturbance I'm feeling. There's something wrong with and doubting my own judgment of my disturbance is the moment the practice begins. Is that how it comes together?
So you're saying doubting your own judgment of the disturbance? I'm not sure exactly what you mean. Can you elaborate?
Well, maybe I'm more aware of this. I practice with a number of psychologists and so on, but we tend to pathologize certain kinds of disturbed feelings and think that they're a sign of something needing fixing. And so doubting that reflexive analysis and judgment and just letting disturbance be disturbance and then looking into it with curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're talking about here. And this is not to pan psychology in any way, shape, or form, but this is, at least in the Zen way, it is allowing oneself to feel that disturbance in the body and mind. So not just to think about it, but to allow ourselves to feel it. And it's amazing. It really is astounding to me even to this day, and I've been practicing this myself for many years, but it astounds me how powerful it is to just let ourselves feel something that we're feeling. And again, we're biologically programmed to avoid pain. And so, emotional or mental, uh, what we think is emotional or mental pain, if we can't get it down to a physical component, we can't really enter it in the way that I'm talking about. We have to be able to feel it. And feeling it means allowing ourselves to feel what's going on in our body. And it's an issue that a lot of people have. Um, I would say probably most people have this issue. Uh, uh, that the avoidance of what's happening in the body. And so you don't have to diagnose it to do this. All you have to do is feel it, which you're doing anyway. It's there. If it's there, it's there. And it's just a matter of directing our attention towards it instead of bypassing or avoiding it when it's there. Uh, that can be pretty painful at times to do, and that's why we often avoid it. Mac, yeah. Mac, you're holding the mic? Can you hear me?
No, you're muted. Melbourne, you're muted.
Oh, something's muted there. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Okay, now it's clear.
Now you're good.
Yeah, I was wondering what was going on before.
Thank you, Roshi.
It was highly disturbing to. Never mind. It was,
That talk makes me think of the koan that I'm working on right now, which I don't have it memorized, but it's the supreme way has no difficulty or something along those lines.
yeah,
So it makes when I think about it, at times I might not be as much trying to control the external environment in order to get that peaceful state, but in a way I'm still chasing it, but looking for the peaceful state within the chaos around me. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, to see if that is still going in the wrong direction.
uh, yeah. I think if you're trying to chase any state, that's you're trying to predetermine a state which you then are looking for on some level. And there may be peace in the midst of chaos, but you don't have to particularly seek that out. You would have to then allow yourself to just experience what's going on, allow yourself to go into it again and see how you feel about it, see how how does it resonate? What does it ping off of within you? What buttons does it push? And go into that rather than trying to seek some ideal peaceful state within that. Because whenever that happens, we have some idealized state of mind that we're chasing after. Um, yeah, I mean, it happens just in meditation in general when people have an opening experience. It's very easy, I would say. Not only is it easy, it's probably almost guaranteed that one is going to get attached to that state when that happens. Um, and again, there's a lot of teaching about that, about how to work with that afterwards.
Thanks. I got one other question for you while I've got the mic.
Sure.
How does like the precepts fit into all of this, which is in a way can be looked at as trying to control some form of internal external environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think it's so much an attempt to control, to me anyway, what the precepts are is kind of a map for what conditions can we create in our life uh, to foster deep inquiry and awakening. Uh, so I don't see them as an effort to control so much as a realization that, if we go around harming people, then the karma of that is not going to be more peace or more understanding between people. So yeah, maybe we do have to control our impulses if we feel a need to go around harming people, yeah, then there has to be some control. That's a lot more basic level we're talking about a more advanced level than that. We're hoping that hopefully that those of us who entered this kind of practice have dealt with that kind of level of pathology. I think when you're talking about really deep pathology, it's difficult for people to apply this. This is a more nuanced approach, but I think the basic, to go back to what you were saying, my view of the precepts is kind of a map more than an attempt to control.
I was just thinking,
Diana, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I was just thinking about a teaching that I read from Ezra Beta, who used to be with Joe Kovac. I know they had a separation at some point, but when he was practicing with her, he had a very severe autoimmune disease, just debilitating. And what I remember about the teaching is he was talking to Joko about it, like when I get better, I can get on the path, and this is kind of causing me problems in my practice. And she just said, that illness is your practice. Not you have this illness along the way. It is your practice. And he said that was like a whoa.
Yeah.
How can that be? How can that difficulty not be something I have to incorporate into my practice that actually is my practice? I mean, it's a thing I wonder about.
Yeah. Are you saying you wonder about it, or he said that?
Yeah, I do wonder about. I mean, that could actually be where your practice is, that illness or that whatever, or terrible thing. Put it that, the terrible thing that's happened to you, or someone you love very close. Those kinds of things. How can that be your path?
How can it be? Well, because it's reality. It's in front of your face in that moment. So whatever's in front of us in any given moment can be our practice. It doesn't have to be any particular thing. Yeah, I had an interesting experience with someone recently. I won't say who it was, but someone who was in our interactions defining practice as sitting meditation, not in other kinds of work that we were engaged in at the time. And well, my view on that is that the disturbance that was being created by the interaction was a great practice for this person, but this person could not see that. And so I think that as long as we can't see that, then we're stopped by that kind of thing all the time in all ways, and it'll keep emerging. If we don't put these things to rest, if we don't go deeply into them, they don't go away. They just come back at another time when we're stressed or when we're in a difficult circumstance or one form or another. Whatever we haven't resolved just reemerges. I wish it wasn't like that, but my experience is that's exactly the way it is. So the idea that we can escape from ourself, by traveling to somewhere else in the world or doing something else outside of ourselves is an illusion, in my opinion. It doesn't mean that some other circumstance might not foster our ability to go within, but we carry the same self and the same disturbance around with us everywhere we go. It doesn't matter what part of the world it is or anything else along those lines. So yeah, that is the place to practice. And that what she said, what Joko said to him was very typical of her teaching, I think, but also in general, just there's this notion we have that, well, if I just wait for the time that it's the better time to do this, well, how do you know you're going to get that? How do you know? How do you know how much longer you have on the planet? How do you know you're going to have a year to do it or 10 years to do it? You don't really. So might as well start where you are now and work with what you have now, because if we're always looking to, well, if the circumstances are better, then I'll be able to do this, then I'll be able to commit myself, then I'll be able to really do it. Well, that goes back to what I was saying earlier. That's expecting external circumstances to determine our inner state rather than our ability to move deeply into whatever's going on in our state of mind in a given circumstance, even in the midst of great difficulty, which we all experience at one point or another. And if we don't, you're going to when you die, when you get close to death. but most of us have plenty of experience with that before that point, I think.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
Appreciate
you're
it.
welcome. Lynn.
Hiroshi?
Let's
Okay.
take Lynn and then Robert.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna say to Diana, I'm sitting here with a migraine headache.
Uh,
That's what I've got right now.
hmm,
And it's not gonna go away. I have a deep preference that it would not be here. But that's not what is. And so what I discovered after a childhood of stuffing things away was, if I don't walk through these things and have the feelings that I'm having, all the things that I feel when I get a bad migraine, then I end up with a box of stuff that I haven't dealt with, that's sitting in my attic or my garage somewhere, that I'm going to stumble across sometime in the future. And it's not worth it anymore to not be with what is. I had a really good friend of mine died at the beginning of December, and I had lots of things that I've had to deal with in the aftermath of that, and just besides just the sadness of losing her, and do I wish everything were hunky-dory right now and I hadn't just lost a best friend? Of course I do.
yeah.
But that's not what it is. And so I work with the sadness, I work with the numbness, I work with the pain of the migraines. I work, it's not very glamorous, but and in the midst of it, I find that I still think life is sweet. There's something wonderful about being alive, even on the days when I'm, not so hot. So,
Good. Thank you for that.
and I just wanted to say, Roshi, I always remember Frank when we think about these things, and he says, "Where's your Zen now?" Or his wife would say to him, "Where's your Zen now?"
Yeah, exactly.
And so I asked myself that question. So where's
Yeah,
my
where
Zen
is it
now?
now? It's a good question.
It's a very good question.
Where's your Zen now? How you dealing now? Yeah, thank you. Robert.
Hey, hi, Roshi. It just was striking me that sort of the Zen principle, or the core of Zen, of being awake and waking up, that we often think of it as like a special event or a big insight of some kind, but it seems like on a moment-to-moment practice level, that if we're trying to have a different state than the one we have, it's very difficult to be awake because we're busy wishing and dreaming of something that's not there. So the whole awake agenda seems to be very much aligned with what you're talking about.
Yeah. And that's the big thing with mindfulness, is the reason we're not mindful is we don't like a lot of the moments we're in.
Yeah.
So we don't want to be mindful of the uncomfortable or painful or migraine moments. We want to be mindful of the wonderful, beautiful moments.
Yeah.
But if we can see, like what Lynn is talking about, obviously no one wants a migraine. I don't want to have a cast on my leg right now for 3 months, but it's there. And so how do I work with that? How do we work with the migraine if it's there? And showing up is harder in those circumstances for virtually everyone. If you can show up in those circumstances, then when that's not happening, then it's even you feel even more of a sense of release from your suffering. So it's good training. It's good training. Unfortunately, or fortunately, as the case may be.
Probably both.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hi, Roshi.
Ah,
Ginger.
hi, Ginger.
Hey there. Thanks for your talk. Yeah, I don't get on the microphone much because it's kind of vulnerable and don't want to ramble on too much. but it felt really good to just drop the chasing of the meditative moment, the meditative feeling. And when that happened for me today, it seemed like there was a lot more clarity to pinpoint the different causations of suffering for me personally. And so then it just became more clear how to work with that.
Mm.
And what I was thinking about is the first two noble truths. The first noble truth is there is suffering. And then I think the second one is to go into it and understand what's causing it. So that was a pathway for me today with your talk. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, what you just said is exactly key. I think that when we can, if we can meditate without chasing anything, then things become more clear, because then the ego isn't trying to grasp something that isn't there in that given moment. So yeah, anybody else? Elizabeth.
Hi, everybody. I've been listening. I was sitting in Mike's office over there, and then coming over and seeing your faces is really nice. It's really, really nice. So, but the thought that came to me just towards the end here, I think was a lot of what I was hearing other people say. This idea of acceptance of what is. And I love the welcoming prayer that's part of the Christian contemplative tradition. So it's like starts off just by saying, just recognize whatever's happening. Thoughts, feelings, body sensations, all of it, recognizing that. And then saying, welcome, welcome. And then saying, soften, soften. It's such a beautiful thing because, your body mind will keep offering you things to welcome and offering you more things to soften around. And that idea that how do we be present with anything in such a way that we soften, that the resistance to any resistance to whatever it is just keeps softening. And then I think what's revealed is what the Buddha is pointing to, right? That awakened state. Wherever you are, Al, I want to be there.
Oh, really? Oh, there. Yeah.
You look like you're in a Zen.
I'm not actually in that rock garden, but I was there once. It's a photo I took in Germany. So
Oh, it's beautiful.
yeah, it is a beautiful garden.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that having an open heart, open mind is so important, and yet at times it's so difficult, because again, the idea that our circumstances in the world and the universe and everything around us has to be in some kind of alignment for us to have this deep inner state experience is what gets in the way. And the only way I think to get it through that is to allow ourselves to feel how we're not open, the ways in which we're not open. And it's painful to realize we're not open. There's pain in not being open. There's suffering in that. So yeah, any reminders we can have, like that prayer or anything like that, it can be really useful, I think.
I think Tim has a question for you, Roshi.
Okay, sure.
Hi there. Thanks. Great talk. There's a piece I've been trying to write over the last few years that I keep polishing, and I can't quite get it to a point where I think it will say quite the right thing. But its rough title is Zen in the Fast Lane, ripping off of the Eagles. The suggestion being right in the headline of the article, that forget this sitting on a cushion in a quiet room, find the nearest really noisy freeway and meditate right next to the fast lane, with a little as you can imagine, footnotes saying, please don't really do this. The point being that one of the problems of Zen that I've encountered is that everyone thinks they have to do Zazen in a quiet space. I have to be undistracted, right? And it creates a kind of a cocoon where you help sort of pretend that there's no problems, there's no issues you're trying to deal with. You're just trying to sit there and be peaceful. If thoughts arise, and we even say this, don't we? If thoughts arise, let them float by like clouds, as if we're going to sit there going, oh, this migraine, let's just let it float by like clouds. Yeah, maybe, but a migraine is a migraine. Sitting with it and sitting with the pain, it is a real challenge. And I do wonder whether there wouldn't, in fact, be some merit in training in meditation in a noisy environment. Get a friend to get a jackhammer going next to you.
Well, I hate to say
and
this, but we've had several buildings in Melbourne since I started like 23 years ago, and they've always been on noisy streets.
Right.
So
Yeah,
in
and
fact, yeah,
yeah.
the first time I ever sat in the first building, which was in 2003, 2 or 3, I can't remember the exact year. The first time I sat down, previous to that, I hadn't even noticed the noise so much because I was working on the building so hard. And I sat and I went, oh my God, this is so loud. People are going to freak out. But they didn't. I mean, maybe they did initially, but people did come and sit anyway. And the street we're on now is actually, believe it or not, quieter than that street was, but not by much, as those sitting in the Zendo there in Melbourne can attest to. I'm sure the trucks going by and whatever, the sirens. So
if
yeah.
if the noise is constant or repeated and frequent, then our brain tunes it out. People that live near railway tracks can't sleep at all the first week, second night, week forwards, then notice it. So it actually has to be an unpredictable noisy environment for it to actually help you to be centered in the chaos. Because once you've done a bit of training of being centered in the chaos, then maybe you're a little bit more prepared to be centered in the chaos of our own life as it's presented moment to moment.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, it could work just in the opposite way. There are people, you can get attached to having noise or having quiet. So I think the key thing is, and I think possibly you're alluding to this, is to not be attached to it, but be present with the environment we're in and not avoid practice because there's a little bit of noise or a lot of noise even. That is maybe great practice. And thanks for bringing that up. Maybe one more person if it's not too long. Anyone else? Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Rishi.
Thanks, Roshi.
Bye-bye.
We did it.
Good job.
We did it.
This camera is like terrifying. I feel like I'm in Jurassic Park.
Oh, Jurassic Park. That's funny.
Jose was moving, because I was thinking, okay, because Jose usually sits out there and he moves. I was like, okay, Jose's on camera, he's not gonna move, but he did.
I don't know if I pushed the right button here. I'm panicking.
We're recording this.
Cancel. Right,